It is time for the fifth and final part of my Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver playthrough. Good morning, good evening, whatever time of day it is for you. Welcome to this thing that I do called Thor's Entertainment. I am Thor, and since this is going to be the last episode of my playthrough, if you are just now tuning in to watch this, well, you've missed almost everything. Still, I am happy to summarize what has happened so far. When I first started the game, we found out that mankind has mostly been conquered by a vampire empire that is being run by the game's antagonist, Kain. Now, Kain did not go on this conquest alone. He resurrected and turned 6 deceased warriors into his vampire lieutenants, and all 6 of them went on to create factions that could act as an army. Among those lieutenants is our main character, Raziel, who was eventually brutally murdered by Kain. The fellow lieutenants that Raziel considered his brothers either actively helped in the execution, or they did nothing to stop it. Centuries later, Raziel was resurrected again. This time it was by a mysterious elder god who would benefit from Raziel getting revenge and killing off all the lieutenants and Kain. Following this resurrection, Raziel was no longer a vampire. He turned into a wraith-like creature that could devour souls. And the revenge path has been pretty successful. Most of the targets have been killed. Melchiah was crushed to death. Zephon and Dumah were set on fire. And Rahab was boiled alive whenever he was exposed to sunlight. There is one other lieutenant, but he ends up getting away. That just leaves Raziel looking for Kain. So now it is time for Raziel to start peeking into the events of the past and future, as he finds and faces off against the final boss of the game. Since we now have a new boss that we need to go find and fight, that means we're going to have some new advice from Ariel and the Elder God. Let's go ahead and hear what they have to say.
In the bowels of an inverted clockwork, the tormentor awaits. Be wary, Raziel. Those blind with rage are by destiny ensnared.
And just like that, we have heard everything that Ariel has to say in this game, which is an achievement. Now that I have gotten that one knocked out, let's go ahead and see what the Elder God has to say next.
In the furthermost canyon of Nosgoth's frozen wastes, the hushed silences embrace an ancient enigma. In the bowels of this labyrinth, your master awaits.
Okay, that's kind of interesting. The Elder God said exactly the same thing that he told Raziel immediately after he defeated Dumah. And I know that every time we talk to the Elder God in the underworld, he basically says the same thing to Raziel that he said after being the previous boss anyway, but there are just little differences each time. That is the main reason I decided to go ahead and include his little speaking segments from the underworld in this playthrough. But this one is exactly the same. There are no differences whatsoever, which I guess makes this the only time that happens in the game. So I suppose I could have skipped this one, but I did not realize it was exactly the same whenever I started recording, and I've already recorded it, so I guess I'm just going to go ahead and include it, and we can make note of the fact that this is the only time the Elder God says the exact same thing twice. Anyway, getting back on track, our next objective is to have Raziel infiltrate a new area in the frozen wastes. So I am having him return to the area just outside of Dumah's fortress so we can get that process started. And we just passed the walls to Dumah's fortress, and we're going to continue down this snowy path until we reach its end. We'll know we are there whenever we see the sundial on the ground. Now, I made a point to show that sundial earlier in the playthrough, but now that we have defeated Dumah and consumed his soul, we have a new ability. And whenever Raziel runs around specific objects, he can unwind a band of spectral energy to constrict around that object. Whenever Raziel does that, the band of energy is going to turn the object in the direction that he is running. Using this new ability, we can turn the sundial, which is going to have an interesting effect on the architecture nearby. What the new constriction ability is going to do is turn the sundial so that it opens up a gate to what used to be the Oracle's Cave. That was a location back in the very first Legacy of Kain game, Blood Omen. This is one of very few locations that kind of returns here in the sequel game. It kind of joins the Pillars as well as New Craptor's Keep. Although the Oracle of Nosgoth's Cave is a little bit different here in Soul Reaver than it was back in Blood Omen. Now, part of it's going to look a little bit familiar, but a lot of it's going to be some new areas we never got to see before. That is, of course, assuming that you played Blood Omen, which whenever I was playing Soul Reaver for the very first time, I had not played that game. Even so, since most of the cave is brand new, you're not really missing too much. And before I get too invested in traveling through these caves and trying to figure out their puzzles in order to reach Kain, I'm going to make a quick pit stop at the warp gate room, that way I can go ahead and activate that in case I need to come back here later. Now this is basically the very end of the game, so I really should not have to do that. Although the very last time I was in this location was in my previous playthrough attempt, and that's when the game basically glitched out on me and I had to start all over again. Now I hope that does not happen again, but if it does to a lesser degree, it would be nice just to be able to fast travel all the way here instead of traveling through the Dumah territory a little bit and then having to go through the whole sundial area and then all the way back here. Granted, that's not a whole lot of time, but it adds up after a while. And this room here is what used to be the Museum of the Oracle of Nosgoth, where a bunch of different artifacts had been pulled from time and preserved. It seems like all of those are basically gone now in this game, but that's what used to be here. And it used to be a lot harder to get to this point as well, like back in that very first game whenever you're playing as Kain. You had to go through a network of caves, monsters, spike pits, just all kinds of fun stuff. Then again, Kain flew into the top of the mountain using his bat form, whereas Raziel went through the base of the mountain, so probably a different route. I'm sure Kain would have preferred the shorter option that Raziel went through. Anyway, we left the museum by going into the spectral realm and passing through a hole in the wall, and that gave us access to a new area with 3 different rooms. There's a big room in the middle with some closed double doors, and then to the left and right of that middle room there are going to be 2 other rooms. They have smaller doors that can be closed or open depending on the block movement. And what I mean by that is that in the right room you would find that there are blocks and there are holes in the walls with symbols above them. Anytime you remove one of those blocks from the wall, whatever symbol was above it, that door is going to close. Although anytime you shove a block into a hole in the wall, whatever symbol was above it, that door is going to open. The objective here is to open the double doors in the middle room, and that requires 2 blocks. One block needs to go into a hole in the wall that is below a symbol that looks like a black Z, and the other one needs to go into a hole in the wall that's below a symbol that looks like a black circle. I started off in the room to the right because that's where all the blocks are that we are going to need to move, and the room to the left really doesn't have any blocks, so we need to get a block over there. In order to do that, I started off in the room to the right by removing a block from the wall that is below a symbol that looks like a blue 7. Removing that block ended up closing the door to the left, but I continued to move the block all the way into the middle room and as close as I could to the closed door. I then returned to the room to the right, shifted into the spectral realm and passed through the bars, and the junction point between the rooms has an object that we can move using the constriction ability that we got from Dumah. I have Raziel start running in a circle until that finally moves, and that is going to change the pathway a little bit, preventing Raziel from having direct access to the middle room, but also giving us access to bars that allow us to access the rooms to the right and the left. And after doing this pathway change, I return back to the room to the right, and I continue to move around the blocks. This time I removed the block from the wall that is below a symbol that looks like a red Z. And after removing that block from the wall, I move it to the opposite side, which is going to be directly in front of the hole that is below the symbol of a blue 7. Replacing the previous block, I shove this one into the hole and it opens the door that we closed earlier. And after opening the blue 7 door again, I shift back into the spectral realm, I pass through the bars to the central junction point, and I make my way over to the left room for the very first time. Like I mentioned earlier, there are not really any blocks in that room, so I really need to get the block that I moved into the central room into the left room. After getting Raziel into that left room, I have him shift back into the material world, and since we opened up that door again, there is nothing obstructing Raziel from going between the left room and the center room, so I am able to lift the block into the left room and I move it all the way to the hole that is directly below the symbol of the black Z, and I have Raziel shove that block into place, and just like that, we are halfway done with getting the double doors open in the center room. All we need to do now is return back to the room to the right, remove the block that we put in the space below the symbol of the blue 7, and then move it over to the space that is directly below the symbol of the black circle. Whenever that block is in place, at that point we have the spaces for the black Z and the black circle covered, and that is going to open up the double doors. In fact, I believe that opens up every single door, so there's not going to be anything obstructing our path going forward. And alright, here we go, time to open up every single door, and that's one block puzzle down, many more to go. Okay, the double doors are open now. It is time to explore a little bit more, and oh yeah, right. There are a bunch of Turel clan vampires in this dungeon. They are almost the exclusive enemy of this area, with the exception of the 2 Dumah vampires that are right by the entrance of the cave. And I do find this interesting considering the explanation for what exactly happened to Turel in this game, or at least the explanation that they would give retroactively later on. Because like I mentioned previously, Turel was supposed to be in this game, but he ultimately got cut, which would make him the only brother or fellow lieutenant of Raziel to somehow survive the events of this game. Although just leaving Turel alive would be a massive blemish on Raziel's revenge path, so eventually the creators of the game would come up with an explanation for what exactly happened to Turel, and then find a way for Raziel to eventually face off against him in a future game. And the presence of the Turel clan being inside this cave and eventually further into the area where Moebius had his chronoplast and all his time-traveling related equipment, that did make explaining what exactly happened to Turel a lot easier from a storytelling perspective. And I'll go ahead and explain it here because I do not know when or if I am going to ever play Legacy of Kain Defiance, which is the game whenever you finally get some answers about what exactly happened with Turel. But the explanation is that Turel is no longer in this time period. It turns out that Turel was sent way into the past prior to the events of Blood Omen, or possibly during the events of Blood Omen. All I know for sure is that he's in a time period where Kain has not yet denied the sacrifice to save the pillars. And when you look at all the vampires he produced guarding this area, it seems pretty reasonable to assume that Turel had messed around with the time travel equipment, probably not even realizing what exactly they did, and inadvertently sent himself over a millennia into the past. And thus we have our explanation for why Turel is not able to be found in this game and not able to be killed by Raziel. He is just not here anymore. And it would take Raziel finishing the events of this game, Soul Reaver 2, and then going through most of Legacy of Kain Defiance in order to figure that out. Although since he was intended to be in this game and part of his boss fight is available to us courtesy of this remaster's bonus content, I may go ahead and show that just to kind of give an idea of what Turel looks like, and also kind of show what the design of his boss fight would have been and kind of theorize how exactly you would have defeated him. I'll save that for after the credits though, we'll just continue to focus on the actual game for now. Now you've been seeing me do this in the background, but I had Raziel go all the way up this escalating pathway from the center room that we opened up earlier. Eventually we found an obstruction, a door that needed to be opened, and we opened it by using our telekinesis to knock blocks into spaces in the wall. Once both blocks were in the wall, the door opened. And beyond that was another puzzle we could solve by using our constriction ability on movable objects. We had 4 columns with protrusions at the very bottom of them, so I went ahead and used that constriction ability to move those protrusions towards the center platform in the room. Once all 4 of them were pointed towards the middle of the room, the door back in the Museum of the Oracle of Nosgoth opened up. So now we're going all the way back down to that museum room. And on the other side of that door that was in the museum, we are going to find the cauldron where Kain got to have his first experience, his first introduction to Moebius, although Moebius at the time was disguised as an Oracle of Nosgoth. That was his alter ego so he could go undetected and give advice to people he wanted to manipulate. And that would include Kain, considering that Kain was going around killing all the Guardians and Moebius was secretly the Guardian of Time. We are about to have a cutscene though, so in just a moment after that's over, I'll explain what exactly those manipulations were and why he did it.
The Oracle's Cave, where Kain's first fateful meeting with Moebius occurred. Moebius played the role of a doddering soothsayer, stirring his pot of visions while dispensing enigmatic predictions to gullible visitors. Underneath the facade was Moebius the Time Streamer, sorcerer of the Circle of Nine, a ruthless manipulator with the power to bend time. Since his murder at Kain's hands centuries ago, these caves have stood vacant, though, like Moebius himself, they are rumored to be only a facade for a much larger, more elaborate complex. I sensed that Kain was here, and at that moment, I would have plumbed the depths of hell to find him.
So Moebius manipulated Kain into going after a tyrannical conqueror called the Nemesis. And the solution that was given to Kain was go into the past and kill the Nemesis before he could ever become a tyrannical ruler to begin with. Whenever Kain did that, the public just saw a vampire killing a young man with a bright future because he wasn't a tyrant yet. So that sparked a crusade that nearly resulted in the extinction of the vampires, and it was so close to success that Kain was the very last vampire.
This, I deduced, must be the man himself, the Time Streamer, Moebius. He seemed not at all the impressive figure I had imagined from Kain's boasted exploits. And yet, even this cold image radiated a certain undeniable power.
Kain would go on to kill Moebius and every other Guardian except himself, refusing the sacrifice of the Pillars, and creating the world that we are in now that's overrun with vampires. And while I did not talk about it, this is a very easy puzzle. Just go ahead and pull the lever so that the arms on the clock move. Whenever it reads 6 o'clock, there is going to be a hole in the floor that opens up, giving us access to a new area. I have Raziel jump down there, and we are going to find a light puzzle. So the setup for this puzzle is that there is a beam of light now going through the hole in the floor, and it is being projected onto 3 different screens. Before it actually reaches the screen, though, it's going through these blocks that seem to have glass windows. Each of those windows are tinted, so they are a specific color. And you will notice the screens at the very end of the beam of light are also a specific color. What you need to do here is rotate the squares so that the light is passing through the correct tinted window, so that the light turns the same color as the screen before it's hitting it. So if the screen is red, we need to turn the block so that whenever the light goes through that block, it is turned red as well. Or if the screen were blue, we would need to turn the blocks so that the light is passing through the blue windows. There is one case where the screen is purple, so we need to turn the block so the light is passing through both the blue and the red windows, which turns it purple. Now if you for any reason have difficulty seeing color, just have Raziel turn the blocks in the exact same way that I am. As far as I am aware, they are always going to be in the same order. So even if you can't really see what colors you're turning it to, as long as you turn the blocks in the exact same way, you should solve this puzzle. After you are done with that light puzzle, the door is going to open up and reveal a long hallway. I have Raziel travel all the way to the very end of that. And whenever he does reach the end, there are going to be some double doors that he goes through, revealing a clockwork puzzle, which is also kind of a color-based puzzle as well. I go ahead and I have Raziel take out the vampire in that room using the fire glyph. And again, I do have a separate video covering where to find all the glyphs, so if that is something you are interested in, feel free to check it out. I'll make sure the link is in the description. So okay, to solve this puzzle, you need to look at the symbols on the wall and see what color of circle they are in. Then you have to look at the clockwork that you are standing on, and you will notice that each arm of the clock, the hour, the minute, the second, they are all a different color. But those colors correspond with the symbols on the wall. So what you will need to do is move the arm of the clock that is the same color as the symbol so it is pointing at that symbol. For example, the arm of the clock that is yellow needs to be pointed at Melchiah's symbol because it's in the yellow circle. The red arm of the clock needs to be pointed at Kain's symbol because it's in the red circle, and the blue arm of the clock needs to be pointed at turel's symbol because it's in the blue circle. So similar to what I was saying earlier, the order never changes, so if you have any trouble seeing these colors, just have Raziel do the exact same thing that I did for each arm, and you should be able to solve these puzzles. Fortunately, this puzzle has a bunch of different symbols that are distinguishable from each other, and each arm of the clock looks a little bit different, so they are all distinguishable even if you can't necessarily see the color. Anyway, solving the clockwork puzzle opens up another door, and we continue down the hallway. I continue to use the fire glyph to take out each of the vampires I find along the way. Now, I believe the fire glyph is the second most powerful glyph, just behind the sunlight glyph. But the sunlight glyph takes up more energy to use, so I'm trying to avoid using it and using the fire glyph instead, just to kind of conserve that energy and still kill off these vampires along the way. Which, even if the fire glyph is only the second most powerful, is still more than powerful enough to kill off these vampires in one hit, so there's really no reason to use the sunlight glyph over the fire one. Unless you were kind of bored and maybe just wanting to see what each of them looks like. So that hallway takes us all the way to the next puzzle, which at this point is just going to require us to move some blocks. That way they are no longer blocking the gears, and those gears can continue to turn. And whenever those gears do start to turn again, you will see that the mechanisms all around us start to move as well. Now, the moving equipment is mostly just important in two different ways. One is that a platform raises that we can reach, and then glide to a walkway that was previously unreachable. And this is that platform right here. And once we are on that walkway, the next distinguishable mechanism that starts moving is a little pendulum-like platform, and from the walkway we can reach that platform whenever it comes our direction. Then we just have to ride that to the very top of its rotation, and we find another hallway to the next puzzle. And in my previous playthrough, this is about as far as I got before the glitching made my previous playthrough unplayable, or at least prevented me from being able to reach the end of the game. Because my actions with this next block puzzle along with the glitch caused me to be locked in place and unable to progress. Now that being said, let me explain what this puzzle was supposed to be. We have a descending walkway that spirals all the way down to a bottom floor. At the bottom floor there are going to be 2 blocks. Each of them has symbols on them, and whenever you look at the floor, there's a square that has a picture on it. Whenever looking at the symbols on the squares, you see that if you were to put them together in the right order, you could start to make the same picture that's on the floor. but you need 2 more blocks in order to fill out that picture. And if you go back up the spiraling walkway, you're going to find additional blocks on platforms that are beyond bars, so you cannot go up to them and push them yourself. You have to use your telekinesis to knock them off those platforms, and then they will fall all the way to the bottom floor so we can use them in our puzzle solving process. You keep knocking them off until you have all 4 blocks on the bottom floor, and then you finish the puzzle. And whenever all those blocks make the picture, and they are covering up the original picture on the floor, then the door is going to open. So with all that being said, what caused my previous playthrough to go wrong? Well, the physics within the game did not do what they were supposed to do. Now previously throughout the playthrough and within this episode, you have seen me stack blocks on top of each other. So with that being said, let's say hypothetically Raziel uses his telekinesis to knock a block off the platform, and then it falls all the way to the bottom floor, and there is a block in the spot where it would have landed. You would assume that that block would land on top of the other and just stack. After all, we've been doing that the entire game. Well, in my previous playthrough, that's not what happened. And it took me a while to understand exactly what happened, but instead of stacking, the falling block fell all the way through the bottom block. So rather than stacking, I had 2 blocks occupying the exact same space as each other. I could not pull them apart. In fact, I couldn't pull the blocks at all. I could not interact with it. But if you walked around it, it would occasionally glitch, so occasionally you would see the picture of one block, and then it would switch to the other. That's how I figured out kind of what happened. So I could not complete the puzzle because I could not move the blocks apart, and I need all 4 blocks to solve that puzzle. Here is where I made the big mistake. I saved my game, and then I quit, and then I reloaded the game, just hoping that maybe the game would correct itself. Like maybe the room would reset. Well, it did not. In fact, it got worse. And I will even show you exactly what happened, because I still have that save available to me. I will load up that save so you can see it for yourself. Just let me go ahead and finish this puzzle first, that way we have it knocked out, we don't have to worry about it anymore. I am nearly done with it after all. If you go back and look, I was so worried about locking my progress again. The first thing that I did was go all the way down to the bottom floor and move the bottom 2 blocks so far out of the way that there was no way the 2 blocks on platforms could possibly land on top of them. Because while I do love this game, having to start it over again for a 4th time would have been really annoying. And okay, one last flip and the door is open. I'll go ahead and transition to the soft locked playthrough, that way I can show you exactly what happened. And whenever I'm done showing you that, I will return to that exact point when the door had just opened. And okay, here's the gameplay from my soft locked playthrough. And I am making my way to that puzzle room now. But while I am getting to that area, I can summarize it by saying that all 4 blocks are not there anymore. Some of them are missing, so I cannot solve the puzzle. Which means I cannot reach the end of the game, which is really unfortunate because after this puzzle there's really only 1 left. And then you go down a hallway, see a bunch of different cutscenes, and then you face off against the final boss of the game. So I basically soft-locked my game at nearly the very last possible moment. And on top of that, whenever I reloaded the game, other stuff was slightly broken as well. If you recall, the pendulum platform that we used earlier to jump through the hole in the wall to reach this hallway to begin with, you know, the one that started moving after we got the gears rotating again, yeah, that platform is gone. The pendulum is still there, but it's basically just a stick with no platform at the end of it. You can still technically make the jump, but you have to land on that stick just right so that it rotates upward, and you're still able to jump through the hole in the wall. So yeah, the game kind of just fell apart on me at that point, and I had to start the playthrough all over again. Now as I am retracing my steps through the soft lock playthrough I did previously, I made sure to stop and look at the platforms where the blocks were previously. Then I had to use Raziel's telekinesis to knock off the platforms so that they would fall down to the bottom floor. I'm making a point to stop here and look at these because the blocks are no longer there. They have already been knocked off, so they should be at the very bottom floor. However, whenever I do get Raziel to go all the way down to the bottom, we are only going to see 2 blocks in the center of the area. I have Raziel shift back into the material world just in case the glitch is only visual and the blocks are actually there and only visible in the material realm. And whenever I go back into the material world, well, the turel vampire attacks me almost immediately and I kind of have some struggles against it. But besides that, there are only 2 blocks at the bottom. The other 2 are completely missing. And with there not being 2 blocks on the platforms above and there only being 2 blocks at the very bottom, I do not have the 4 necessary to solve the puzzle, and I have no way of making them appear again. But yeah, I wanted to make sure I just kind of showed this for a moment because it was really interesting. It's kind of rare whenever I completely have my progress halted like this. So I figured I'd go ahead and show exactly what happened because I just happened to still have that save available to show off. But besides this exact moment that softlocked my game and completely halted my progress, everything leading up to this point in that first playthrough went completely fine. There were no glitches, nothing out of the ordinary. But then this happened, and well, yeah, here we are. Which is really funny because if you go back to the beginning of this playthrough, I softlocked the game again, only this time I had nothing to do with it. Whenever it comes to that case, a platform just did not load in Melchiah's territory that I absolutely needed to progress in the game. So I had to start a new game 3 separate times before I actually reached the ending. All because the game just glitched out around me, really. And what's funny is I have not had any issues with the game since then, so I was just having really bad luck. And okay, back to my completed playthrough just after that doorway opened for me. I could finally advance to the next part of the game and actually complete the game, and what was waiting beyond that doorway was a hole in the floor that I have Raziel jump all the way to the bottom of. At the bottom is going to be a hallway that I start to walk down before I have Raziel take a look at the symbols on the wall. Make note of those, they are going to be important for the next puzzle. And after I get done looking at the symbols on the wall, I go into the main puzzle room and I kill the 2 Turel clan vampires using the fire glyph again. And then I take a look at what's actually going to be the puzzle. There is going to be a rotatable object on the ground that we can rotate using the constriction ability, and that object has a symbol in the middle of it, and we can rotate it to where it's pointing at one of 3 other symbols. We want to rotate it so that when combined, the symbol on the object and the symbol it is pointing at basically make the same symbols that we were seeing on the walls before entering this room. Take my time and I do that for all 3 of the objects that I can rotate with the constriction ability, and whenever all of them are put in the proper order, suddenly we have platforms that start swinging around due to a rotation from the machinery becoming active again. I have Raziel jump onto those moving platforms, and when standing on those platforms we see that there is an opening on the walls nearby each of them, and in that opening is another platform where we can go ahead and walk up to a handle that Raziel can interact with. Raziel needs to lift all 3 handles, and whenever doing so, he opens up a secret hallway that takes us all the way to the end of the game. So yeah, whenever it comes to how close I was to the end of the game before my previous playthrough just completely glitched out on me, this was the only other puzzle that I needed to solve before reaching the final part of the game, the final fight. Like, after this puzzle, I think there are 4 or 5 cutscenes as you're walking down the final hallway. Then at the very end of that hallway is the warp gate room if you want to go do that. And then the only other thing at the end of that hallway is a large door that, when opened up, allows you to go face off against the final boss. So yeah, my original playthrough came to an end at really one of the very worst possible times because I had basically done almost everything there was to do. That is okay though, I have had time to get over that traumatic experience in this video game, and now Raziel is going to lift the final handle, open up the secret hallway, and we are going to start very briskly making our way to the finale of Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Now down this hallway, like I mentioned, there are going to be a few cutscenes. Raziel is going to approach what is called the Chronoplast, and he's going to have visions of the past, the present, and the future. And it is interesting seeing these after the series was basically ended because there has not been a new edition in about 20 years. Because the franchise kind of ended with Legacy of Kain Defiance. So we get to see the early stages of where they foresaw the series going. And I'll be more than happy to comment on exactly how those scenes came to be. Like, in what ways did the visions change between this game and when they finally got introduced in later games. But first, let's look at the past.
My arrival in this miserable age. What trickery is this?
It is no illusion, Raziel, but a glimpse into the currents of time itself.
Alright, Raziel starts off by getting to see the wonderful moment he got resurrected in the underworld and this whole revenge story really kicked off. But he is not done looking into the events of the past just yet. Let's take a look at another.
These apparitions torment me. Has this all been foretold?
Alright, and second was whenever the fight with Kain the first time around ended and the Soul Reaver was broken upon Raziel rather than killing him, an event that becomes increasingly important as the series goes on, because that becomes a very key plot point that the entire franchise starts to revolve around. You get to see that a lot in Soul Reaver 2.
Impossible! This must be one of Kain's deceptions.
And in the third vision, we get to see the moment when Raziel figured out that in his past life before becoming a vampire, he was a Seraphan warrior priest who was part of the effort to try and exterminate the vampires, making his entire new existence that was orchestrated by Kain one gigantic sick joke. That is a major plot point in Soul Reaver 2 as well.
My mind reels with conflict. Does Kain await me moments from now, or in some century yet to come?
I believe that cutscene was a scrap from the leftover cut content that was originally going to be part of this game, and it's now being framed as a future event. Considering Kain does not have the Soul Reaver in that moment, I don't think it's whenever Raziel and Kain eventually fight at Avernus Cathedral, which was my original guess. So I guess that's whenever Raziel confronts him at the Seraphan Stronghold in the second game. Well, the second Soul Reaver game. But originally, I think that scene was supposed to be at Kain's mountain retreat in this game.
This cannot be. What madness does this scene portend? Kain must think me credulous to suffer these lies.
Now that scene definitely does come to be in a future game. In fact, it's one of the very last moments of the entire series. Although whenever it did actually get acted out towards the end of Legacy of Kain Defiance, it was way less violent than that cutscene would have you believe. Ariel quite willingly gives up her spirit to Raziel's Soul Reaver to purify it, and he reluctantly does so, as it is one of the only ways to overcome what is either truly the greatest threat or one of the greatest threats in the entire franchise.
Is this phantasm a conjuration of my mind, or an echo of future events?
There is not a lot to work with in that cutscene to know exactly what it was, but if I had to guess based on the long corridor and Raziel having a red Reaver, which kind of looks like a different version of the Fire Reaver, I am guessing that's supposed to be the moment when he sees Janos Uldren die in the Soul Reaver 2 game, which is right after he gets the Fire Reaver in that game. Granted, that looks a lot different than the Fire Reaver in this game, but that is my best guess. There are not exactly a bunch of red Soul Reavers in the franchise, so I'm imagining that's probably just a different variation of the Fire Reaver. Although if anybody watching this does know exactly what scene that was supposed to be, do let me know. But yeah, before we go into the final boss fight of the game, I am going to go ahead and activate this warp gate, the very last one. And that is just in case some glitchy stuff happens again, which again, that has not happened the entire playthrough, but I'm not just going to forget how the previous two went, and how each of those playthroughs came to an end due to glitches, so yeah, we're going to play it safe, and if it's something minor, I can return to this exact point rather than going through the entire cave and all those different puzzles and things of that nature. Even though they are all solved, I would still have to walk through all of them, and that would just take a while. And I would much rather just go ahead and jump here to the final boss and conclude this playthrough. Speaking of which, I am done with the warp gate. Let's go ahead and go down the hallway. There's going to be some big doors. I am now fully healed and ready for a fight. And let's go ahead and open those and say hello to Kain.
At last. I must say I'm disappointed in your progress. I imagined you'd be here sooner. Tell me, did it trouble you to murder your brothers?
Did it trouble you when you ordered me into the abyss?
No. I had faith in you. In your ability to hate. In your self-righteous indignation.
Lies. You cannot have foreseen all of this.
Eternity is relentless, Raziel. When I first stole into this chamber centuries ago, I did not fathom the true power of knowledge. To know the future, Raziel. To see its paths and streams tracing out into the infinite. As a man, I could never have contained such forbidden truths. But each of us is so much more than we once were. Gazing out across the plains of possibility, do you not feel with all your soul how we have become like gods? And as such, are we not indivisible? As long as a single one of us stands, we are legion. That is why, when I must sacrifice my children to the void, I can do so with a clear heart.
Very poetic, Kain. But in the end, you offer no more than a convenient rationalization for your crimes.
These chambers offer insight for those patient enough to look. In your haste to find me, perhaps you have not gazed deeply enough. Our futures are predestined. Moebius foretold mine a millennium ago. We each play out the parts fate has written for us. We are compelled ineluctably down preordained paths. Free will is an illusion.
I have been to the tomb of Zephon, Kain. Your dirty secret is exposed. How could you transform a Zephon priest into a vampire?
How could I not? One must keep his friends close, Raziel, and his enemies even closer. Can you grasp the absurd beauty of the paradox? We're the same. Zephon and vampire. With our holy wars, our obsession with Nosgoth's domination, who better to serve me than those whose passion transcends all notions of good and evil?
I will not applaud your clever blasphemy. The Zephon were saviors, defending Nosgoth from the corruption that we represent. My eyes are opened, Kain. I find no nobility in the unlife you rudely forced on my unwilling corpse.
You may have uncovered your past, but you know nothing of it. You think the Zephon were noble, altruistic? Don't be simple. Their agenda was the same as ours.
You are lost in a maze of moral relativism, Kain. These apparitions and portents. What game are you playing now?
Destiny is a game, is it not? And now, you await my latest move.
That was the first time I had listened to that cutscene in about 20 years, and I have to say the dialogue in it is still fantastic. Now, a lot of that dialogue gets reused in the second Soul Reaver game in the opening cutscene, although that cutscene is a bit shorter than what we had just watched. So there was a little bit that was removed here and there, and the dialogue's not exactly the same. And I would say if you have only ever watched the opening cutscene for Soul Reaver 2 rather than listening to all the dialogue here at the very end of this game, then I would recommend going back to that cutscene and listening to it again and comparing the two. And I only recommend that because it was really fun for me to pick out all the little differences between that cutscene and this one. Overall, I like this longer version of it better, but what they did for the cutscene for the beginning of Soul Reaver 2 is really good as well. Especially considering the graphics in that game are a lot better, so you get to watch the characters actually doing some interesting stuff in the background as opposed to just standing around like they were in that cutscene. But just focusing on the dialogue, I do like this longer version better. Anyway, enough talking about the dialogue of the cutscene, we have a boss battle taking place. And it is very similar to how Raziel fought Kain the first time around back at the Pillars. Kain is going to teleport around the arena, and he is going to start charging up his bolt spell, and he's going to cast it at Raziel if he is too slow. So Raziel has to make it all the way to Kain before he can cast that spell and strike him. If Raziel is able to strike Kain before the spell goes off, then Kain is going to teleport to the next level of this stage. There are 3 different levels, 3 different stories. He starts off in the very bottom of the pit with Raziel, then he teleports to the second level, and then there's a 3rd top level. So Raziel does have to work to get to Kain a little bit more here than he did back at the Pillars, which was all just 1 level. Although if you do take the time to get all the extra health artifacts and expand your health as far as it will go, that means in this fight, Kain can no longer just hit you once and knock you into the spectral realm. You potentially can take a couple of different hits, and on top of that, back at the bottom of the pit, there is going to be a symbol that Raziel can stand on that's going to replenish his health if you need it. So yeah, it does take a lot more effort getting to Kain in this boss fight compared to the very first one, but at the same time, he also cannot defeat you as easily just depending on what your actions were prior to this fight. Now, this was my very first time fighting this version of Kain, the final form, in about 20 years, so I was very rusty whenever it came to this fight. With every other boss fight in the game, I at least got to fight them once, courtesy of my previous playthrough before the glitch happened and my progress got locked. So whenever I started this playthrough, whenever I got back to those bosses again, those fights were really efficient, really clean, and I did not have any problems in them. The one exception is this fight because I did not get to do it previously because of my locked progress, so here I am incredibly rusty and not doing all that great. I was very rusty with tracking his movements and I did not do a very good job in this fight, but because I did take the time to expand my health as far as it could go, Kain was not exactly killing me either. So that bought me plenty of time to finally get a favorable roll on where he was teleporting to, and then eventually close the distance and hit him and continue on the fight. And even though it was a little bit of a struggle on my part, eventually I was victorious.
You nearly had me, Raziel. But this is not where or how it ends. Fate promises more twists before this drama unfolds completely.
Be warned, Raziel. Once you cross this threshold, you are beyond my influence.
Raziel, Redeemer and Destroyer, Pawn and Messiah. Welcome, time-span soul. Welcome to your destiny. Where time is but a loop, a loose stitch in the universal cloth, a streamer might seize upon a chance, a fatal slip, and plunge the fate of planets into chaos.
So yes, to be continued is the anticlimactic way this really good game comes to an end. I would say more than any other part in the game, I think this is where all the cut content really shows the most. The ending that we just watched for Soul Reaver was not the original ending that was intended, that was just the one that we ended up getting after all the content was cut. While I do love this game, the ending just feels very abrupt. Although I will say the abrupt ending is not as bad here in this remaster because it also includes Soul Reaver 2, which that game begins immediately where this game ends. Raziel crosses time by going through the portal and he speaks to Moebius, and Soul Reaver 2 begins at that exact point and continues that conversation to start the game, and it just kind of seamlessly continues on to the rest of the plot. Overall, though, I actually feel like Soul Reaver 2 is not as good of a game as the very first Soul Reaver, with the exceptions being its storytelling and its graphics. Like, the storytelling in both games is fantastic, and that is mostly true for the entire Legacy of Kain series. I mean, that is the main reason I still remember the series so fondly after about 20 years. And overall, I do think Soul Reaver 2 looks pretty good. It is just not as interesting of a game to play for a number of reasons. I will probably be playing through that game and covering it at some point, and I'll go ahead and discuss all that later on whenever I actually am playing the game, because the remaster does include both of them, so it kind of seems pointless not to play the second one. Doing a quick playthrough of Soul Reaver 2 would be really easy. It's not a very hard game at all. I might start working on that playthrough after I finish up my videos on the Resident Evil 3 remake. But enough talking about the sequel game. What are my thoughts after beating Soul Reaver 1? Well, I think the remaster overall is pretty good. I mean, it looks good and it was really nice just to be able to revisit this game. Although 2 different glitches did force me to have to start the game over again, but this playthrough that I'm highlighting in these videos did not have any of those issues. I've also beaten the game one more time since recording this gameplay, and that playthrough is one that I managed to complete without any game-breaking glitches. So I am willing to chalk up those early issues I had as just being really bad luck. So after all this time, the story is still excellent. I think the voice acting is still good. And even if it is a little bit dated now, the gameplay is still pretty solid for its time. I mean, the combat is super simple, but it works as intended. I have always liked the problem solving that comes with almost every single fight. Raziel cannot beat most enemies by himself, so whether he needs a weapon, sunlight, water, fire, or something else entirely, you are always problem-solving how exactly you are going to fully beat an enemy. This is especially true whenever it comes to the bosses. Whenever you know how to beat them, none of them are exactly difficult, but having to figure out how exactly to do it the first time around was a challenge. Almost all of the bosses are puzzles you have to solve, beating them with the environment. I've always enjoyed that, discovering the one way to beat an otherwise undefeatable enemy. Then there is the world itself. For a PlayStation 1 game, having a world that big without a bunch of loading scenes was awesome. The only loading screen I remember from back in the day was one at the very start of the game, and I think that was it. After that, you could explore the world completely uninterrupted, and that was really impressive considering you have 2 different versions of that world, and they exist at the exact same time, being able to switch between the spectral and the material realms. Now, that's not exactly crazy by today's standards, but trust me, that was a lot to have without a bunch of loading screens in the PlayStation 1 days. Aside from just being a large world, it was constantly encouraging the player to go back and discover more things. With every ability that you got from a boss, new areas were becoming available for Raziel to go explore. The obvious examples were the ones Raziel had to go through in order to progress the plot, but there were many optional locations as well. You could go back to areas you had already visited, and with those new abilities, you could open up new pathways. Those could lead to optional items or entirely optional locations that you could easily miss and beat the entire game without ever visiting. So the game was constantly giving you reasons to investigate places you had already visited, and getting to explore that world again with improved graphics was awesome. And if you cannot tell, I'm a big fan of Soul Reaver. I really enjoyed getting to play through it again. I was very happy getting to do this. So I am pretty thrilled to have this playthrough completed. I'm really happy to have these videos to look back on. But when I mentioned earlier we would take a look at the bonus content, specifically the turel content, I will do that after the credits are done rolling. That way everyone who is involved in this remaster and the original game get all the credit that they deserve. And while we are waiting on the credits to finish, I guess I'll go ahead and speak on what I am going to be doing next. The next game I want to do playthrough videos of is one that I had previously postponed, so because of that, it's probably not going to be very surprising. The next one I want to play is going to be the Resident Evil 3 remake. I kind of needed a little bit of a Resident Evil break after doing so many Resident Evil 2 videos, and also after having a little bit of mixed feelings about the Resident Evil 3 remake. I had played through every single difficulty and even beat the Inferno mode, and I was just kind of not sure about how I wanted to approach the videos for it. But enough time has passed and I feel pretty good about it, so now it is time to cover that game. And boy, it took some effort to get that footage. That playthrough is going to take place on the hardest difficulty, the Inferno mode, and I very specifically beat the game hitting all the criteria for the highest ranking that you can get, the S ranking, while not using any infinite ammo weapons or any items from the shop. So I had basically nothing at all helping me out on that hardest difficulty, and it was a doozy of a playthrough. So if that sounds interesting, feel free to check it out. If not, just give me a little bit of time and I'll probably have those Soul Reaver 2 videos up here before you know it, just in case you are really not into the Resident Evil stuff. And alright, the credits are now over, so time to make good on my word. Let's check out the bonus content, and there is a bunch of it in this game. And that is going to be especially true for Soul Reaver 1. If you go into the bonus content, it is going to have a bunch of stuff like galleries, a music player, lost levels, lore of Nosgoth, videos, Dark Chronicle, just all kinds of stuff. I am going to be focusing on the lost levels. There are a few different ones, and I'm going to cover a few of them while I'm here. The first of the lost levels that is referenced is going to be the Undercity. And as far as I can tell, this was going to be connected to the human citadel and was going to feature a boss character called the Vampire Priestess, or just the Priestess, as she was going to be part of a vampire-worshipping human cult. Raziel would have had to have infiltrated the Undercity and reached this boss, beating her to get the ability to control the minds of most humans and vampires. And fortunately for us, we get to see exactly what the Priestess looked like, and we even get to see what her boss arena kind of would have been like, although it is missing a bunch of functionality. We just watched a placeholder for a cutscene, but nothing really happened. We are in the arena now, not exactly sure how exactly this fight was going to happen, but with the Priestess able to control vampire minds, I'm guessing we would have fought a few here. And if we climb up the wall, we actually get to see the Priestess. Other than her model being here, she does not try to attack you or really do anything. So it is kind of hard to say what she would have done in a fight against Raziel. But if we strike her once, she dies, and you have the option of consuming her soul. Like I mentioned earlier, defeating her would have given Raziel the ability to control some human and vampire minds, and finishing that fight would have sent Raziel in the direction of the smokestack within the Turel territory. The smokestack can actually be seen in the background of the opening cutscene for the entire game. I am showing a picture of the cutscene from the original game, not the remaster, because it's a bit more easy to see in that one. The remaster also has the smokestack in the background, but it seems to be a bit more zoomed in and a little bit less obvious what it is. But yeah, whether it's the original or the remaster, the smokestack is back there. Even though in the final Soul Reaver product, we never do visit the smokestack. However, before the cuts, Raziel was supposed to. It was being used to create smoke that would block out the sun so the vampires could wander around more freely. And Raziel would have had the objective of stopping the production of smoke. That way vampires all across Nosgoth would be drastically weakened. And while on this little mission of his, Raziel would have encountered the brother that was missing from the main game. He would have found Turel. And alright, here we are in the arena where we would eventually face off against Turel. As you can see, the door to enter this area is closed behind Raziel, and he can't really go anywhere other than this arena. If I were to have Raziel shift back into the material world, the door remains closed, so still nowhere to go. If I go back towards the descending walkway, nothing happens, but if I go back to the door, Raziel will begin analyzing it, trying to figure out how to get out, only for two large stone doors to open up and reveal Turel entering the arena. Now this cutscene is definitely not complete because Turel does not make any noise whenever he's walking into the room, and his walking animation does feel especially stiff. Even so, it's really cool to see what exactly he would have looked like in this game. And even though he is entirely silent when making his entrance, Raziel does eventually talk to Turel, and we get this dialogue.
Let me pass, Turel. I have enough blood on my hands today. My quarrel lies with Kain.
Poor Raziel. Your rage blinds you to the bond of gratitude that we owe our master.
Gratitude? Toward one who would have you grovel at his gate like a dog? You once had noble aspirations, Turel. Now, how humbled are your goals? Do you prosper on the scraps he casts you?
Your insults will do nothing to blunt the agonies of your demise.
You killed me once. Behold the result. I have no more to fear from you.
Now, to my surprise, this fight is somewhat functional. Ariel will pursue Raziel wherever he goes in the arena, and if Raziel is far enough away, he will shoot telekinetic blasts at him. Although the fight is not fully functional because if you are right next to Turel, he just kind of stares at you. He does not do anything to try and attack you even though he is right beside you. And if Raziel were to strike Turel, then Turel would start laughing at him. I do try a number of different things against Turel just to see how he would react. I try the execution animation with the Soul Reaver, but I could never get it to land. Regular strikes and the telekinetic blasts against Turel don't really do anything other than make him laugh. So I can only really speculate about how exactly you were supposed to beat Turel. If you were to look at the ceiling, it looks like there is a pipe up there, and I'm kind of curious if you were supposed to break the pipe and let water flow into the room, because by this point in the game, Raziel would be able to swim, and Turel would probably still be weak to water. And that would make a bunch of sense to me because that means you would have used pretty much every single vampire weakness against the brothers at some point. You would have used physical trauma against Melchiah, crushing him to death. You would have used fire against Zephon and Dumah. You would have used sunlight against Rahab. The only one that is not used in the main game to kill one of the brothers is water. So it makes sense to me that the original idea for Turel would be beating him with water. Although that is purely speculation on my part. Regardless, those were two bosses that were not included in the final game of Soul Reaver. The Vampire Priestess was completely removed from the entire franchise, never to be seen again in any other game, although Turel would eventually return in the final game of the series. That would be Legacy of Kain Defiance. After all the time-traveling shenanigans that happen in this series, Raziel eventually finds him beneath Avernus Cathedral. And by that point in the game, Raziel's revenge quest is a little bit different than what we see it as right now. But even so, he and Turel do eventually end up fighting each other to the death, and, well, Raziel wins. Even though it took multiple games, Raziel would eventually have revenge against all of his vampiric brothers. There is one more lost level I wanted to go over, and that's going to be Kain's Retreat. The description says that this would have become available to Raziel after defeating Turel, and after leaving the smokestack. This was where Raziel was going to get his final battle against Kain, something that would have resulted in Kain's death in this game. And as we know in the final product, Kain does not die. So that is definitely the biggest change that happens between what was originally intended to happen and what we eventually got. Now, there are no leftover parts of the boss fight with Kain that was supposed to take place within the retreat, but I kind of feel like it was supposed to happen inside this throne room. Although that is kind of hard to say. Still, this feels like an especially well-designed room, and I kind of feel like it had some big significance in the original intention of the game. And a final boss battle in Kain's throne room does sound like a pretty good way to finalize that fight. And even though I kind of feel like the throne room is where that final battle would take place, I do want to draw attention to another location around this retreat. It is going to take me a moment to get there though, so bear with me for just a moment. While I navigate Raziel to that location, I guess it is worth mentioning that they were really far in the development of this area, like it's pretty fleshed out. The entire retreat has a lot of detail to it. You can travel through a lot of it. Granted, there is one section where the door will close behind Raziel and he cannot go back through it, but overall everything seemed pretty much in place. Oh, and also the bridge that Raziel would have taken at the very end of the game to reach the Silenced Cathedral. That way he could activate the organ and then kill all the remaining vampires. Yeah, that's not there, but I can kind of see where it was supposed to be. Anyway, this is the spot that I wanted to talk about right here, the spot with Kain's symbol on the ground and the stairs in the background. After having played through the entire game and then seen the visions inside the chronoplast, this location should look a little familiar. In fact, I'm going to show a specific vision from the chronoplast that is relevant to this location. This is the exact location that Raziel was in whenever he saw the vision of himself in the future facing off against Kain. The chronoplast would have you believe that's a future event yet to happen, but really it was just cut content from the original game. And because of that, we never truly get this exact face-off between Raziel and Kain. Mind you, they do face off against each other eventually, but it does not happen in the exact same location or way that is being portrayed in that vision. The closest examples that come to mind are Raziel nearly killing Kain inside the Seraphan stronghold, and then much later in the series in Legacy of Kain Defiance when Raziel fights Kain for real inside Avernus Cathedral. Neither of which look like what happened in that vision because the stronghold looks a lot different, and inside Avernus Cathedral, Kain is armed with a physical version of the Soul Reaver again, which is something missing from that vision. So it's kind of open to interpretation which of those conflicts was being portrayed in that vision because it was never originally portraying any of them. It was showing a completely different conflict entirely. Now, the very last thing that I'm going to show in this cut content is the road to nowhere that would have been the bridge back to the Silenced Cathedral. The original ending would have had Raziel using the deadly hymn from the Silenced Cathedral that can kill vampires. By broadcasting it loud enough across Nosgoth, it theoretically could have killed all of them. And knowing what we do about Soul Reaver 2, that is a game where Raziel truly realizes how many people are trying to manipulate him, and just how much Raziel is capable of manipulating fate. So I feel like it is safe to theorize that at the end of the original ending of Soul Reaver 1, Raziel would have figured out that the Elder God was manipulating him, and that even though Raziel's revenge was definitely warranted, his actions may have had greater consequences than he originally realized, and he would have sought a way to somewhat undo them or at least right the wrongs that he had caused, trying to fix the dying world around him. And similar to what actually happens in the final product of this game, Raziel probably would have looked at time travel as a way of correcting it. But again, all of that is just speculation. Everything I have just shown you was cut from the game and would never make an appearance in any future games. At most, we got Turel again. And even then, the circumstances around Turel appearing are completely different. But yeah, I think that's enough for reviewing all the cut content. I'll have Raziel go ahead and take a seat on Kain's throne, and we'll go ahead and wrap this thing up. This is going to be the end of my playthrough of Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. I'll eventually pick up Soul Reaver 2 and give that one a go as well. Next up is going to be the remake of Resident Evil 3, and I am considering some other games to play through as well. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, feel free to check that out whenever it comes out. Until then, feel free to check out the other things I have on the Thor Entertainment channel. At this point, I am starting to get plenty of playthroughs of other games up on there as well. That includes things like the remake of Resident Evil 1 and 2, the remaster of Crash Bandicoot. I have played through a bunch of different Mortal Kombat stuff, and now we can add Soul Reaver to the list. So yeah, check out any of it if it sounds interesting to you, but even if you don't, thank you for checking out this video, take care, and hopefully I will see you next time.